The White House is telling Republicans, get real, that the situation in Ukraine is not just going to stay in Ukraine, that it has real security implications for Europe and for the United States. And they are showing classified information and they're talking about what happens if the $61 billion does not go through. So make no mistake
Mhm.
about it, there is no short-term alternative. If this money doesn't come through, it's going to make it even more difficult on the front lines. We already see soldiers are rationing shells. There's not enough 155 millimeter shells. Europe is not going to meet the 1 million shells that they promised this year. Well, the North Koreans have already delivered those to Moscow. So it's really a dire situation. We also see Ukrainian commanders saying we can't do the kinds of operations we want because we don't have the kit that we need now. And this is only a couple months after the U.S. Has run out of funds.
Mhm.
So, if we could just elaborate on that Europe point, Melinda, because obviously the US is not the only ally that's in the game here that has been providing the support. Europe has as well. I think even a greater chunk of their share of GDP has been spent relative to the US. Are they too starting to pull back?
No, actually, the opposite is happening. So the Europeans are starting to wake up. Scholz in Germany has said it's time to start doing more. But it's not clear how far they're going to go. So Scholz has a conference the first week of February. He's bringing everyone together in Europe, and he's saying this situation is serious. We have to get real. And he's going to point fingers, and he's likely going to point fingers at France, Italy, and Spain, who have not done enough when you look at the figures. But just to zoom back out for a minute, there's different categories of aid, and the US is the biggest donor of military aid. Europe has done a lot, but they've been more active on the humanitarian and economic assistance front. That's why this is such a big deal.
So, how do the dominoes fall here if American money comes to an end, Melinda? Is this, as Nick mentioned, Mark Milley's vision of a stalemate, a war of attrition that essentially grinds Ukraine down to nothing? Or is Vladimir Putin emboldened to the extent that a NATO country could be involved, Poland or one of Poland's neighbors, and we have a major problem that entangles the U.S.?
Joe, I'm going to quote my friend General Philip Breedlove, who ran NATO, and he just gave a wonderful briefing, and he said everything depends on us and on the choices that our leaders make now. There's different scenarios that we could run through, but if Ukraine does not get the weapons it needs to defend itself, it will lose eventually. Ukrainians are not going to give up, even if the $61 billion does not come. But more Ukrainians are going to die. When I go to Kiev and talk to them about these sort of dire scenarios, they tell me we will fight with forks, we will fight with AK-47s. We've lost too much. We know what Russian occupation is, and we're not going to live that way. So it's going to get much messier and more people are going to die. I think the concern, though, is that if Putin is able to take a big chunk of Ukraine, through attrition and through our bad policy choices, and again, if we do not provide this assistance, Ukraine is going to lose, and it is going to be our fault, and it is going to threaten Western security for the next 50 years. Could NATO get drawn in? Absolutely. Putin's plan is to reconstitute his forces, and he may go after a NATO member next. Does that automatically pull the US in? It does not automatically pull it in, but under the Article 5 guarantee, if a NATO member
Hmm.
were hit, they would have to have a discussion and they would likely defend that territory. So it would involve the United States.
So then let's talk about Russia's capacity specifically. As you talk about how Ukraine's capacity, their munitions are waning. They're obviously losing a great deal of Ukrainian soldiers. What about Russia? Do they really have the resources to continue the fight this long?
So far, they do. So they just got 1 million shells from North Korea, and they are getting more rockets and drones from Iran as well. The Russian side has good, talented financial managers, and they have been able to make things to keep the economy afloat and to keep things going in spite of losing a lot of very talented folks. So, it's a question of how long can they hold out? But that's actually the wrong question. I think in Putin's mind, he's wondering if he thinks he can hold out longer than the West can. And that's we're in a pivotal point right now with the US election.
What happens to our reputation internationally, our allies or beyond, Melinda, if this goes down the way it appears it might? No border deal, no money for Ukraine, and they're left alone.
Joe, that's the money question. I think it means that America's not much of a superpower anymore. That we don't keep our promises. I mean, even in the language of Joe Biden, we've seen him change from "we will be there as long as it takes" to "we'll be there as long as we can." And that is not a mistake in rhetoric. The sands are changing politically right now, but that's not where the American people are. If you look at where the American people are, they overwhelmingly support Ukraine, and they don't like bullies. They view Vladimir Putin as a bully. So I think it's time for Americans to pick up their phones and call their congressmen and call the White House and demand that we keep standing with the people of Ukraine until they are able to push the Russians back.
Well, as we talk about Vladimir Putin, and we were just discussing this with our own Nick Wadhams, this idea that he's starting to signal that perhaps he would be open to conversations about how to bring this to an end. Can he be viewed as a trustworthy actor in any conversation?
No, he cannot. And honestly, we've seen this movie many times before. So if you look at Putin's narratives, the Institute for the Study of War has looked at when does Vladimir Putin talk about negotiations? And the answer to this is he talks about negotiations when the West has to make a hard decision about weapons, or when the West has to make a hard decision. He's trying to distract us. He is not interested in negotiations whatsoever. Look at Dmitry Medvedev's rhetoric 2 days ago. He says that he's going to use nuclear weapons. He's talked about over and over again about how Ukrainians are not real people. They reject Ukrainian territorial claims. The Russians are not serious about negotiations, and they're trying to keep the United States from passing this assistance bill. That's all it is.